February 18th, 1949, London, England. Mrs. Olive Henrietta Olivia Robarts Durand-Deacon is meeting a man at his workshop to discuss her new invention, false fingernails. What Olive doesn't know is that the man she knew as a perfectly pressed and manicured neighbor was actually a scam artist and a serial killer who was going to murder her and put her body into a vat of sulphuric acid. Like the other wealthy victims he'd lured with promises of business deals only to steal their assets, she was joining 5 other victims whose bodies were already sludge. This is a story of greed, narcissism, and murder. This is John George Haigh, the acid bath killer. Hey y'all, I'm Kris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potter. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our Welsh-speaking friends,
Yes.
Criso.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I would love to go to Wales.
Yeah, me too.
And that's across the pond because we're in London.
Yep.
Look at you go. Look at us go. Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who are like you, who love true crime, can find us.
Yep.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want true crime with us every single day of the week, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Go to Facebook, type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a couple questions, and you're in. The group is growing, so please go join.
And they're a lot of fun.
They are so much fun. I post photos and other information in there. It's just a great group of people. Great true crime folks.
Yep.
We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee.
Yep.
He drinks it all the time,
All
not just
the
when we're recording the podcast.
Yep.
You can find that link in our show notes as well, and you can also send us a text. That link is at the very top of the show notes, and it says, send Kris and Rob a text. Keep them coming. They're good.
Yeah, we get some great texts.
So we're going across the pond today. Our daughter, as we're recording this, is actually in Scotland. She's in Scotland.
Get in my belly. I know I said that last week. But...
This case is crazy. There's just so much to it. And this guy, he looks a little bit like Hitler. He's just a con man. Can't wait to tell you all about it.
All right.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. The History Press, True Crime Edition, Crime Library, Wikipedia, Murderpedia, All That's Interesting, and the Big Book of Serial Killers.
Oh, my favorite.
I haven't gone there for a while.
I know.
Thought it was time to break it out again.
Perfect. All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
John George Haigh was born on the 24th of July, 1909 at Stamford in Lincolnshire to parents Emily and John Robert Haigh. He was brought up in the village of Outwood, Yorkshire, where his ultra-religious Plymouth Brethren father,
Okay.
that's a mouthful, was a coal mining foreman at an electricity plant.
Okay.
And if you don't know what the Plymouth Brethren are, like me, I looked it up.
Yeah.
It was established around 200 years ago and founded by John Nelson Darby. He was one of the most influential Protestant thinkers of the 19th century. There's been a lot of controversy over the Brethren in Britain, and it revolves around the alleged practice of, quote, shutting up, end quote.
What's
where,
that?
Well, families or people are confined to their homes, and it's used to punish members who break the rules. And in May and July of 2012, 6 girls from the independent Wilton Park School were allegedly confined for 37 days after making a Facebook page.
Oh, man.
So they're a little strict.
Yeah, I think?
Yeah.
Wow.
So John was actually confined to living within a 10-foot fence that his dad put up around their garden to lock out the rest of the world.
Okay.
He was told Bible stories and forbidden from participating in sports of any kind. And he wasn't allowed any sort of entertainment either. So no movies, nothing like that.
So this was no vacation Bible school. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was okay with him because he didn't really like to get dirty, of all things.
Okay.
And in all his actions, his father warned him that he should take care not to, quote, grieve the Lord, end quote. The world was full of evil, and the family needed to keep themselves separate from all of that sin.
I wonder what he meant by don't grieve the Lord.
Don't grieve the Lord. Don't upset him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense that his dad has put this fence around their house and their garden to distance themselves from neighbors.
Right.
Now, John Haigh Sr. had this bluish mark on his forehead, which he said was the devil's brand.
Man.
He'd been marked because he had sinned, and he warned his son John to never do the same.
Wow.
His mother was not marked because she was an angel. And after hearing this, John thought all mother figures should be held in that light, that they were all angels. He's not wrong. Moms are angels.
They are. Just ask them.
Yes, we are. John thought it was remarkable that he was the child of a sinner and an angel, but he was constantly worried about doing something wrong. He was anxious about doing anything that might leave a mark on him and show that he was a sinner. And he was always looking for sin in everybody else, too.
Wow.
And he would lie awake at night wondering if a mark was going to appear on his face, like his dad.
Which are things that, young kids think about. Gee whiz.
Yeah, I mean, he had to be an anxious kid. Yeah.
Exactly.
But soon after, he figures out that he's not going to be punished for going astray or sinning, at least on earth. So when he pulled little pranks like pulling the stool out from under the elderly organist when she sat down to play, and the mark didn't show up on his face, he's thinking his dad's conning him.
Yeah.
His dad was telling him a bunch of hooey, right?
Yep.
When he's a boy, he really loves animals. Sometimes we talk about killers, particularly serial killers, torturing animals, but John loved them. He was a sensitive kid. He kept a dog and several pet rabbits as substitutes for the friends he was not allowed to have.
Wow.
He sometimes gave his own food to the neighbors' dogs because he was afraid they were hungry. He made many statements to the effect that he could not bear the suffering of others. And in the end, he's going to show that he valued the life of animals over humans, for sure.
Well, you know what? There are a lot of animals that have more morals than human beings.
Including Scotty.
The man, the little man.
But he didn't get into trouble often, and when he did, his mom would hit him on the back of his hand with the bristles of a hairbrush.
Ouch.
He later said that this would draw blood, and he would lick this blood, and that is how he developed his blood craving.
That's gross.
That's called foreshadowing.
Oh, hang on, Scotty.
Yes. We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
Now, he goes to school, but he came home right after. He never mingled with the other kids. He's a solitary kid. He's also a really good liar because to avoid stressing out his parents, he started telling them exactly what they wanted to hear instead of the truth.
So he's actually becoming a politician is what you're trying to tell
He's
me.
manipulative, for sure.
All right.
John won a scholarship to Queen Elizabeth Grammar School. He's a smart guy in Wakefield. He loved music. It was his greatest joy. He learned to play the piano and the organ. He was really good at both of them, very accomplished.
Okay.
Then he won another scholarship to Wakefield Cathedral, where he became a choir boy. And that required that he attend cathedral services in Wakefield, which was 3 miles away from his house. And he entered this religious world of Catholicism that was way more structured than what the people in his church were doing.
Sure.
So he's kind of like living in these two different worlds between school and home, and they're fundamentally opposing.
Right.
And in fact, from age 10 to age 16, John actually participates in things that he had been raised to believe were sinful. And his parents allowed it because of the music.
Right.
And he felt like he was getting away with something. And later in life, a psychiatrist will say that this was the sociopathic turning point for John.
Really?
Yep. According to John, he would meditate on the image of the bleeding Christ from portraits in the cathedral at school, claiming that this had adversely affected him and inspired his bloodlust. And it also gave him nightmares. Now, John loved cars, and after finishing school, he took a job as an apprentice in a firm of motor engineers. But since the work was dirty, he didn't really like it that well. Remember, he doesn't like dirt.
Yeah.
But at the age of 21, he gets in trouble for adding sugar to his boss's gas tank and gets himself fired.
That would do it.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
He then became a clerk with the Wakefield education community, but he didn't like that either. He became an underwriter for advertising and insurance, and he was successful at this for a while because it did teach him all about the world of finance. And he even managed to buy an expensive car, a bright red Alfa Romeo. But then he went to jail for stealing the petty cash box.
Why can't you stay out of trouble?
Can't stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
In 1934, John stopped going to his parents' church. He left home, and on the 6th of July, 1934, he got married to a girl he barely knew, Beatrice Hammer. She went by Betty. Okay. She's 21 years old. She's a sprightly woman, described in some sources as a, quote, good time girl, end quote.
Let me interpret that.
John impressed her with his manners and charm. You know, he's always perfectly pressed, always perfectly dressed, not a hair out of place.
Yeah.
He asked her for her hand in marriage. She said yes, but they kept their upcoming nuptials a secret, and Betty actually got cold feet. She even said to a guest at the hotel where she was staying, quote, "Oh, God, I wish it could be anyone else," end quote.
You can choose anyone but him.
I'm sure she did.
That's not the way you want to walk down the aisle.
Yeah.
Now, both sets of parents weren't happy about the marriage, but John's mom and dad allowed the newlyweds to live with them. But the marriage didn't last long, mostly because 4 months after they said "I do," John was put in jail for a little scheme he was pulling.
She wished she would have said "I don't."
Yeah. He would advertise that he was looking for a garage, saying he had the capital to buy it. He would pick a garage owner who was in dire financial straits. He would take an option to purchase the garage, and then during the option, the commission on any cars that John sold would be divided. Then he would use the name of the garage to obtain blank purchase forms for a car, forge someone's signature who lived in the area, and use that to create a fictitious purchase of a non-existent car.
Good Lord, how would you figure all that out?
Well, he worked for that company.
Yeah, but I mean that's an elaborate scheme.
If he would only use his his abilities for good.
If only you would use your powers for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seemed like a lot more trouble to do that than just to go legit.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the company would advance him the money, and John would cash the check and skip town. But he's arrested and he's put into jail, this time for 15 months. And while this is happening, Betty's actually pregnant. She gives birth while John's in prison. She gives up the baby for adoption, and she leaves town.
She vamooses on out.
See ya, bye-bye.
Yeah.
This time when he's out of jail, he tries to go on the straight and narrow with a dry cleaning business, but it failed when his business partner was killed in a motorcycle accident. And after liquidating all the assets, he was kind of done with legit businesses. At this point, his parents were also done with him, and he left home and he moved to London. He reads about a job listing for a secretary/driver chauffeur to William McSwan, whose father is a wealthy owner of an amusement park. And John and Mac McSwan, that's why he went by. Instead of William, he went by Mac, which makes sense, sure. Mac McSwan.
Yeah.
These two become friends. And Mac introduced John to his parents, and they immediately took a shine to John. Mac liked him. He thought he was a wonderful employee. And both guys loved fast cars. They loved expensive clothes. And they loved going out to pubs. They're like metrosexual men.
We're like two peas in a metrosexual think pod.
As John learned how Mac did business, he was promoted to manager. But after a year, he wanted to go out on his own. And he set up a fake solicitor's office, an attorney's practice, using the name of a reputable firm. He would pretend to have an estate sale to liquidate and some public company shares to get rid of. The checks came in and John cashed them without providing diddly squat, because of course it was all a lie.
Sure.
He'd leave that area and move on to do it in a different town. He called himself William Adamson, and he would sell these fraudulent stock shares from the estates of his, quote, dead clients at below market rates. And he was only caught when one of his clients realized he had misspelled his fake name, Adamson, on a legal document.
Yeah, that's probably an important detail you shouldn't screw up.
I mean, if you're going to take on an alias, at least
Yeah.
spell your fake name correctly every single time.
Or choose Smith.
Yeah. In 1937, he's sent to jail for fraud. And while he's there, he vows that he is never going back to prison. He had this plan to go after rich older women because he thought that's where the big money is. And while he's in prison, he realized, or he thought, his biggest downfall was that he left his clients alive to report his crimes. He read about something called corpus delicti, a common law Latin phrase that translates to, quote, body of the crime, end quote. No body, no crime.
Oh, man. Okay.
The phrase generally refers to the principle that no one should be convicted of a crime without sufficient evidence that the crime actually occurred. It's what we talk about all the time.
Right.
No body, no crime.
Sure.
He dreamt up what he considered to be the perfect murder, which was removing the body by dissolving it with acid. And he began researching the French murderer Georges Alexandre Seurat, whose signature had been dissolving his victims in sulphuric acid.
Wow.
So he learned how to work with sulphuric acid in the prison's tin shop. And this is where he experimented on mice. And John was released just after the start of the Second World War in August of 1940. And when he got out, he found work as an accountant with a Mr. Stevens at an engineering firm. He even lived for a short time with the Stevens family, and they had 2 daughters. The older one, Barbara, really shared John's passion for music, and these two had a really close friendship. They even talked about marriage, even though technically he wasn't divorced from his first wife. He was also a lot older than Barbara, but she would be his closest friend, and she always believed in her heart of hearts that eventually she would be his wife.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
In 1944, John's in a car accident where he had a pretty big knock on the head. He had an open cut that bled into his mouth, and he claimed that it revived him. And he started having the dreams that he had about blood as a kid all over again.
Wow.
And this is a lot, but I'm going to read it to you anyway.
Okay.
Quote, I saw before me crucifixes which gradually turned into trees. At first there appeared to be dew or rain dripping from the branches, but as I approached, I realized it was blood. Suddenly the whole forest began to writhe and the trees, stark and erect, to ooze blood. A man went to each tree, catching the blood. That man approached me and said, drink, end quote.
That's pretty detailed and elaborate.
That's an elaborate dream. I can't believe that he actually remembered all. I can't remember diddly squat from my dreams. Nothing.
The last dream I had was about Raisin Bran.
That's a scary thought.
I mean, that tells you how deep my
I
dreams
mean,
are.
that's the kind of dream I would have, like
Yeah.
I was eating cereal while at Disney World or something. You know, nothing like that.
Yeah, mine was in front of the TV and the TV wouldn't work.
There you go. No blood involved.
No,
No blood dripping like dew from the trees.
no.
But it's the same year, 1944, that he rented a basement space at 79 Gloucester Road, and he kept carboys of acid there.
Well, what's a carboy?
Carboys are those glass containers that kind of look like water bottles, like modern day water bottles today for a dispenser, the big ones.
Yeah.
But these are glass and they're filled with sulphuric acid, and they're actually shipped in wooden crates that have stuffing in them, or hay or straw or something in the bottom to keep them from clanking about.
And breaking, yeah. Yeah, if they broke, that would be bad.
That would be bad. In the summer of 1944, he just happened to bump into his old employer, William Donald McSwan, better known as Mac. And the two men went for a drink at the Goat on Kensington High Street, and Mac tells John all about his new venture as a landlord collecting rent from the tenants who stayed in his parents' multiple homes and properties. Mac McSwan was running the very first Airbnb.
Yeah.
That's what it sounded like to me.
Yeah.
Mac takes John to see his parents. They're just thrilled to see him. Remember, these people don't know about his criminal past.
Right.
He never told them, and he actually left that job to take another job. Now, John has a well-paying job at the time, but he was really jealous of the lavish lifestyle that William was living, and he was honestly not doing much work for what he was making. And a few months after running into each other, these two are spending loads of time together. John lured Mac McSwan to 79 Gloucester Road, where John had his workshop.
Okay.
Here, John smashed Mac McSwan's skull with a blunt instrument, like a pipe. Then he slit his throat. Quote, "I got a mug and took some blood from his neck into the mug and drank it," end quote.
What?
He left the body there overnight, and that night, John dreamed of the forest of blood.
Okay, I don't know if I buy any of that.
On September 9th, he took all the valuables and clothing off of Mac's body and put him in a 40-gallon drum he found at an old bomb site left over from the war. But there was a problem because Mac was too tall, so he had to fold his body in half and stuff him inside. Then he packed Mac's overcoat around him, and he's ready to fill the drum with acid.
Jeez.
He put on an apron and gloves, but as he begins filling the tub with this concentrated sulfuric acid, the fumes begin to overwhelm him, and he's in a basement with no ventilation.
What a moron.
So in the middle of this, he has to go outside and get air. He goes back in and finally covers the body with the rest of the acid. 2 days later, William's body was nothing more than 100 pounds of sludge, which John just poured down a manhole, which was conveniently located inside his warehouse in the basement.
Wow.
Don't worry about that acid in the water system, anybody.
Yeah.
John had learned how the acid had made it difficult to breathe, so he fashioned himself a tin mask, and he's eventually going to move on to a full-blown gas mask.
A respirator.
And there's a picture of him wearing this garb, and it looks like a horror movie.
Wow.
He also bought a stirrup pump to get the acid from the carboy container into the tub, because that had been too hard for him as well.
Yeah.
He had an acid bath tub specially made of steel, and he painted it with several more layers to make it resistant to corrosion. Now, John's feeling pretty damn good about himself. In fact, I read that he was euphoric.
Wow.
He had seamlessly murdered Mac McSwan. He took over Mac's duties as landlord. Then he went around to see McSwan's parents, with whom he got really close with, and he told them that Mac had gone into hiding to avoid the call-up, to avoid the draft for World War II.
Gotcha.
And John was able to maintain this deception because he would send Mac's parents letters that he wrote pretending to be Mac. But when Mac's parents weren't buying the story anymore because the draft was over and William still hadn't returned home, Mac hadn't come home,
Right.
They get suspicious.
Sure.
So John murdered the McSwans in July of 1945.
Whoa.
He disposed of their bodies in the same way. He told people that they had gone to America. He rifled through the family files so that he would be able to answer any questions, and had all the McSwan's mail forwarded to him, including the father's pension.
How convenient.
Later, he's going to say that he killed both of them because the father's corpse didn't produce enough blood for him.
Oh, man.
Now he's acting as if he is Mac McSwan. And he's left with all the money and the properties, and he managed to obtain legal control of all their possessions.
Really?
He moved into Onslow Court Hotel in Kensington. He'd stolen 10,000 pounds from the family's account. But it didn't last long because John had a gambling problem, and he went through the cash way faster than he had intended to.
Right.
He sold everything, making a bunch of money, but it's not going to last either. He needed to find another family like the McSwans.
Jeez.
In 1947, he met the Hendersons. He pretended to be interested in buying a home Dr. Archibald and Rose Henderson had for sale. He offered them more than they were asking, and in the end, the deal fell through because it was fake,
Right.
and he was never going to buy anything.
Sure.
He just wanted into their lives. He continued to see them. He formed a friendship so that he could learn everything he needed to learn about them. He often played the piano for them, and he's with them for around 5 months, like being their friend.
Right.
And during that time, he rented the storehouse on Leopold Road in Crawley from a company called Hustlia Products, telling them that he needed the space in order to conduct his experimental work. So he's moved out of the basement to another space that's bigger in Crawley.
Okay.
After 5 months of pretending to be friends with Archibald and Rose, in February of 1948, John spent several days with them and had a bunch of blood dreams telling him it was time to murder. Not to mention, he was running out of money.
Yeah.
So John took them one at a time from the Metropole Hotel in Brighton, where they were living, to his workshop, where he murdered the McSwans. And he tells them that he wants to show them an invention that he's thought of. And then John shot them both with a revolver he'd stolen from the doctor's house. So he lured Rose Henderson to the warehouse after he lured Archie there. He kills Archie first.
Right.
Then he lures Rose there, saying that Archie was ill. And he got her there, shot her in the head as well.
Wow.
With Archie's own gun.
Jeez.
He strung them up and left them there for the night. Then he says he took his, quote, draught of blood, end quote.
Jeez.
His diary for February 12th has the Hendersons' initials next to 2 red crosses. He popped them in the now familiar drum full of acid. He paid their hotel bill, took all their valuables. He forged a letter from them and sold everything for 8,000 pounds, except for the Hendersons' dog, an Irish setter, which he kept.
Poor dog.
Now, when he's got sludge instead of bodies, he dumps it all in one corner of this trash-filled yard behind this building. He's not downstairs in a basement, and he doesn't have a manhole.
Sure.
So he's just throwing it out into this yard, or spilling it out.
Mm-hmm.
But Archie's foot was still intact. But John didn't seem to care. He just dumped it. He goes on about liquidating their assets, sorry to use that word, and walking away with about 8,000 pounds.
And 1 foot.
Which is in the backyard.
Yeah. Jeez.
He copied Rose's handwriting and wrote letters, especially to her brother Arnold, who wanted to go to the police. But through John's forged letters, he convinced Rose's brother that they had immigrated to South Africa. And John elaborated even more, saying that they had to go because Archie, remember Archie was a doctor,
Right.
had performed an illegal abortion.
Oh, wow.
But John's once again in debt. And by February of 1949, he'd been living in the Onslow Court Hotel in South Kensington, and one of the other residents was Mrs. Olive Henrietta Olivia Robarts Durand-Deacon. And if that's not a name, if that's not an English woman's name, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly.
She was a 69-year-old widow who had lived at the hotel for over 6 years. And John and Olive, They often exchanged pleasantries at mealtimes, and John had told her that he was an engineer and an inventor. So he's like this really polished guy, smart dresser, and he's just out there charming these little old ladies. That's what he's doing.
Yep.
Hello, ladies.
At lunch on the 14th of February, Olive showed John some false fingernails that she had designed and asked him if he could improve on the idea and turn it into a product that would be marketable. And he told her, well, I'll think about it. But what he's really thinking about is killing her for her money.
Right.
On February 18th, the two of them drove to John's ramshackle workshop where there's a foot in the backyard. He shot her in the back of the head, and after removing her jewelry and her black Persian lamb fur coat, put her body in a 45-gallon corrosive-resistant drum and filled up the tank with sulphuric acid.
Jeez.
He returned to Onslow Court Hotel and ate a 3-course dinner. So he kills her, stuffs her in the barrel, fills it up with acid, seals it up, walks away, goes home, has dinner.
You worked up an appetite. What do you want?
Apparently.
Jeez.
The next day, Saturday, guests at the hotel who were getting really anxious, they were worried because Olive wasn't at breakfast. And they asked John, do you know where she is? And he told them that he had arranged to meet with her, but that she didn't turn up for their appointment. He claimed that Olive had asked him to pick her up at the Army-Navy surplus store, which he had gone to do, and after an hour, she hadn't shown up. And by Sunday the next day, it was obvious that something was wrong, and Olive's good friend, Constance Lane, was really worried. John's worried, too, about his own butt.
Yeah.
So he drove to the warehouse in Crawley that morning and emptied the sludge from the tank onto the ground again outside the workshop. And when he returned, he asked Constance Lane if anything had been heard. Have you heard from Olive? Has Olive shown back up?
Right.
And Mrs. Lane told him that she had no news and that she intended to go to the police that afternoon. And John says, what do you think he says?
Well, I don't know what he said, but I'm pretty sure she sealed her own fate.
No, she didn't.
Oh, really?
She really didn't. She said, I'm going to go to the police. And John goes, I'll go with you.
What?
I'll drive you to the Chelsea police station.
Okay, keep your enemies close. And yeah.
That's right. So a photo and a description of the missing Olive was issued to all the police departments and the press and to the hotel personnel. And Sergeant Lamburn, the police woman who was assigned to take interviews at the hotel, spoke with the manager, who said that he wasn't really a fan of John Haigh and that he had unpaid debts to the hotel.
Oh.
And Sergeant Lamborn thought John was pretty slick when he was answering her questions, too.
Yeah.
And she thought he was suspicious. She thought he was weird and hinky.
Right.
He was, after all, a middle-aged man among all these wealthy older women. So Sergeant Lamborn decided to do a background check.
There you go.
Within an hour, Scotland Yard reported back that according to the Criminal Records Office, John George Haigh had been arrested several times for swindling and had spent 3 separate terms in prison for conspiracy to defraud, forgery, obtaining money by false pretenses, and theft. So he's immediately put under suspicion. They place him under suspicion.
Yeah.
And John's giving off the worried and helpful friend vibe to the authorities. He's a handsome guy, blue eyes, nice clothes, very stylish and polished. But something people always noticed about John was that he always wore gloves, no matter the season. He was a compulsive hand washer, and he didn't like dirt, and he didn't like his hands to be dirty. And John's giving an interview to reporters who've come to the hotel after getting the missing persons report. And the photo of Olive, got the photo of Olive in this report. And John's telling the reporters that he just wants Olive found safe and sound. Please come back, Olive. We're so worried about her.
And the Oscar goes to...
And this year's Oscar goes to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
John has told the police that he's the director of Herslia Products, which of course is a big fat lie. Instead, from this company, John had just rented this 2-story brick storefront that had this 6-foot fence for all his experimental work where he's got a foot in the backyard. On Thursday, John then went to Horsham in West Sussex and had Mrs. Durand-Deacon, Olive's jewelry, appraised. And when he returned to the hotel, the police were waiting for him. And the police came back to Onslow Court. They're looking to talk to John again. He gives them another statement, which is basically the same thing all over again.
Okay.
But while he's got this good guy act going on, the constables in West Sussex are checking out his place of business, Herslia Products in Crawley. Remember, he said, I'm the manager of this.
Yep.
And on Saturday, February 26th, the police visited the workshop. They forced the workshop door open, and then they're going to look around, see what John's got going on.
Do a little fishing around there.
They found tools, trays, wires, a sheet of red cellophane paper, and a wad of cotton near a bench. 3 carboys, narrow-necked 10-gallon glass bottles used for acid. They're all in a row.
Right.
They're packed in straw. One was empty, another half empty. And nearby laid a new stirrup pump with a part removed. And from a hook on the door hung a rubber apron, stained by chemicals, a pair of rubber boots, and rubber gloves. And inside an army bag was a gas mask.
Yep.
The police team also found a man's hat box and an attaché case that bore the initials JGH, John George Haigh. They left a guard at this storehouse, this storefront, and Detective Heslin reported these items to Inspector Shelley Symes, who authorized their search and seizure. Take them.
Right.
Take them and bring them back.
Okay.
Inside this briefcase, they found papers relating to someone named Archibald Henderson, Rose Henderson, and 3 people named McSwan.
Wow.
There was a marriage certificate, several passports, identity cards, and driver's licenses. And deep inside the hat box was a .38 Enfield revolver and 8 rounds of ammunition, and they could tell that the revolver had been recently fired.
This isn't looking too good for John.
Well, it's not long before they discovered a dry cleaner's receipt for a Persian lamb coat. And they traced the coat back to the one that had belonged to Olive, Mrs. Durand-Deacon.
Right.
Back at the hotel, they found a work basket in her room with scraps of material that matched patches on the Persian lamb coat. And this was all sent to the police laboratory. Then after seeing the story in the newspaper, a Mr. Bull of Horsham comes forward to report that jewelry had been brought into his shop to be pawned the day after the woman had been reported missing. And police collected the jewelry and had it identified by a relative that it belonged to Olive, Mrs. Durand-Deacon.
Right.
And the person who had sold it had signed his name J. McLean. The jeweler's assistant recognized John Haigh as Mr. McLean.
Sure.
And in previous visits, when he had also visited this exact same jewelry shop to pawn jewelry, he had actually called himself John George Haigh. At 4:15 p.m. on Monday, the 28th of February, Detective Inspector Albert Webb was waiting at Onslow Court when John returned home. Detective Webb took John back to the Chelsea police station to, quote, assist them with their inquiries, end quote, to which John said, quote, certainly I will do anything to help you, as you know, end quote. Okay. So they're not telling him what they know. Right. They're just picking him up and saying, hey, we really need your help.
Yeah.
John had a detached air as he was brought into the Chelsea police station. He smoked, read a newspaper, and fell asleep. And for some time, the police said nothing about what they wanted from him. It took almost 3 hours for them to prepare to question him, which was really kind of enough time for him to prepare what he was going to say.
Right.
In the meantime, they had received a report from the brother of a Rose Henderson that John was the last person to have seen her alive as well, before she had vanished without letting anyone know that she was leaving. And this confirmed the suspicions of the detectives on the case. He's been doing this to more than one person.
Okay.
Now, John arrogantly assumed that the police could not touch him. Corpus delicti. So he talks openly and freely. And from the nature of the questions, John realized that the police had evidence against him. And after first pretending that the coat belonged to a Mrs. Henderson, he admitted that he had indeed sold Olive's jewelry and that he knew the coat was hers. And the detectives asked, how had he acquired her stuff? Well, how'd you get her things?
Right.
And what do you know about where she is?
Yeah.
He begins to invent a story about blackmail, which kind of falls apart. And then when he's left alone with one detective, Inspector Webb, he asked what the chances were of anyone being released from Broadmoor. Broadmoor is the institution for the criminally insane in England.
That came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Inspector Webb didn't answer the question, but John had shown his cards because now
Yeah.
he's planning on pleading insanity, right?
Right.
Now, still believing himself to be immune from prosecution, he said, quote, "If I told you the truth, you would not believe me. It sounds too fantastic for belief," end quote.
Wow.
Yeah, he's thinking that he would be shipped right off to Broadmoor, the place for the crazy criminals. And he waved away Webb's caution words, like, do you want an attorney? What do you...
Right.
And John says, quote, "I'll tell you about it," end quote.
Jeez.
And for the next 2 hours, he went into a full description of what he had done to Mrs. Durand-Deacon, to Olive. He claimed he'd shot her in the back of the head. Then he went to his car, fetched a penknife and glass, and used these items to drain blood from her so he could drink it. He put the body into a 45-gallon oil drum with some acid and left it there just to do its work.
Wow.
The crime had brought him about 111 pounds and 10 shillings, and he went further to state that he had killed 5 more people, dissolved them in acid to dispose of them, and actually drank their blood.
Good grief.
He had filled a glass full of blood after each one and had consumed it. He had an overwhelming need for it, according to him. And that was why he killed them, because he needed their blood.
Okay.
Quote, "Mrs. Durand-Deacon no longer exists. She has disappeared completely and no trace of her can ever be found again. I have destroyed her with acid. You will find the sludge which remains at Leopold Road. Every trace is gone," end quote.
Gee whiz.
And then he showed his naive arrogance by following it up and saying, quote, "How can you prove murder without a body?" end quote. So not only has he confessed to Olive, but also the McSwans and the Hendersons, saying that he'd killed them all so he could drink their blood. But he's not done. He also confessed to killing 3 other people, a young man named Max, a girl from Eastbourne, and a woman from Hammersmith. The 3 others might have been part of John's attempt just to convince the police of his insanity, because he said he killed them so he could drink their blood as well.
Okay.
On Tuesday, March 1st, Home Office pathologist Dr. Keith Simpson examined the Crawley workshop. He found bloodstains on the walls and a hat pin at the bottom of a 45-gallon drum. After Dr. Simpson had noticed a gallstone in the sludge in the yard,
Ooh.
they collected all the residue and took it to the police laboratory.
Ugh. How would you like to have that job?
No.
Ugh.
When they get it there, they process it, and it produced a list that included 28 pounds of animal fat, part of a foot, we knew that was there,
Yeah.
2 more gallstones, and a full set of dentures.
So the acid didn't take care of the dentures.
Apparently not.
Well, I guess you could eat whatever you want when you have dentures like that.
I guess. But Olive's dentist came forward and said, yes, these dentures belong to Mrs. Durand-Deacon.
Yeah.
And that sort of sealed John's fate.
Yep.
John Haigh was put into custody and thrown into a cell. John George Haigh was charged with the murder of Mrs. Durand-Deacon on March 2nd, 1949, and he was removed to Lewes Prison. Now, his defense attorney was a man named Maxwell Fife.
Barney was his brother. Sorry.
That was good, honey.
Thank you.
Now, John doesn't have any money to pay for his defense, but a journalist named Stafford Summerfield made a deal with him. The News of the World would pay for his counsel if he would provide to them exclusivity on his life story. It could come out only after the trial, but this was a huge journalistic coup. And for his part, John avoided the embarrassment of saying, I don't have money and I have to have legal aid. That
Right.
didn't look so hot on this guy who's dressed so smartly.
Right, right.
And he absolutely loved writing about himself.
Wow.
It was really controversial, but it was legal for this newspaper to do this. Now, the police commissioner had warned the press about their flood of sensational stories, which all but named the killer before he'd been proven guilty of anything. And John's legal team issued a complaint against the Daily Mirror, and the editor was actually sentenced to 3 months in prison in the same place where John was incarcerated.
Really?
And the company was fined £10,000 plus court costs.
Wow.
It was an unprecedented move, but it served its purpose because nobody else wrote anything.
I'm sure.
John's trial began at Lewes Court on July 18th, 1949. An estimated 4,000 people crowded into this small town in the hope of getting a seat. The lines were really long, most were disappointed, and a few even attempted to sell their seats.
Really? Scalpers even
They were
then.
scalping, but the police put a stop to all of that.
Gotcha.
On the day of the trial, John pleaded not guilty. His mental competency to plead or even understand what was happening around him wasn't even questioned. The prosecutor presented the case and supported it with 33 witnesses.
Really?
Only 4 were cross-examined.
Why was that?
They had nothing to ask him. They're going for this insanity plea.
Jeez.
By the afternoon of the first day, the prosecution rested its case of deliberate, premeditated murder for gain, and it became obviously clear that John's attorney, Fife, was going to rely on a defense of insanity. He wanted to show John's abnormal behavior, and he tried to show that John was in a good mood at this restaurant following the murder. Yeah. And he also entered John's confessions into evidence, where he's saying, I just wanted to drink their blood. Then Fife described for the court the type of mental illness that John suffered from and how it would affect his ability to appreciate the morality of his acts. He could not know what he was doing was wrong. And for this, he called Dr. Yellowlees, a psychiatrist who spoke about his interviews with John and described how his mental condition was consistent with the description of paranoia in the textbook of mental diseases.
All right.
But he couldn't say for certain that John's condition prevented him from knowing right from wrong.
Right.
And under pressure, this doctor admits that, well, he'd actually only spent about 2 hours with John. And he admitted that he had no real evidence to corroborate anything that John had told him. And finally, he's forced to admit on the witness stand that John seemed to know exactly what he was doing and that it was wrong.
Wow.
Why? Because he went to great lengths to cover up his crimes.
Right.
There was this other thing where he was saying that he was drinking his own urine, but no one had actually seen or been a witness to that. So he's drinking blood and drinking his own urine.
It's like, what's his face in
Dodgeball.
Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine? Probably not.
Because I like the taste of it.
It's so wrong. But with that admission, the defense collapsed. But throughout the trial, John is sitting at the table and working on a crossword puzzle. That's what he's doing in the middle of the trial. He didn't take the stand in his own defense. He didn't pay any attention to the proceedings until the two sides made their closing speeches. And the defense spoke mostly of John's mental illness, the drinking of urine, which John had claimed he did as a habit since he was a teenager. That one kind of came out of the blue. He also pointed out that the dreams combined with the blood drinking were an important example of how John's disturbed fantasy life was the reason that he was doing the things that he was doing, that he killed these people. Quote, delusion is the true character of insanity, end quote. The Attorney General rose and pointed out that there was only one issue to be decided, the question of John's sanity. It was a simple case. A man thought he'd discovered the perfect method of concealing a crime, committed murder for gain, and then raised insanity as an issue when he got caught.
Right.
And then for another hour, the judge spoke, telling the jury they were to look at the case that the prosecution presented and see if it was convincing, and if there was any doubt, they must acquit.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
If the glove don't fit, you must acquit.
Right.
It took the jury, how long do you think?
30 seconds.
17 minutes.
No, did it?
To find him guilty.
Yeah.
The judge asked if he had anything to say for himself. Asked John, do you have anything to say for yourself? And he cocked his head and said, quote, nothing at all, end quote.
Jeez. Wow.
The judge sentenced John George Haigh to die. And after the trial, 2 more medical officials watched John closely in Wadsworth Prison and found that he was a sane man. They came back and said he's faking it.
Yeah.
And the Home Secretary, under the Criminal Lunatics Act of 1884, ordered a special medical inquiry just to be sure. And after he was examined, they basically came back to the court and said, let him hang.
Wow.
John finished his life story for the newspaper that had paid for his trial. He also wrote letters to Barbara Stevens, remember the girl that shared his love of music, who always thought she was going to be his wife. He also wrote letters to his parents. He hoped to be reunited with them in heaven. His mom and dad didn't make the journey to see him before he died. They were older.
Yeah.
John believed in reincarnation, told Barbara that since his mission was not yet finished, he would be back. He insisted that he was not afraid to be hanged. Madame Troussard, the wax museum, requested a fitting for a death mask, which John was more than happy to provide.
Wow.
On August 6th, 1949, at Wadsworth Prison, John George Haigh, the murderer who dissolved his victims in acid, was executed. But just before his death, John was offered a brandy, and he replied, quote, make it a large one, old boy, end quote.
Wow.
He was taken to the gallows and hanged by executioner Albert Pierpoint. He bequeathed his clothing to Madame Troussard's Chamber of Horrors, where a wax figure of him was erected. He sent instructions that it must always be kept in perfect condition, the trousers creased, the hair parted, his shirt cuffs showing.
Wow. Little OCD, you think? Wow.
Quote, when I discovered there were easier ways of making a living than to work long hours in an office, I did not ask myself whether I was doing right or wrong. That seemed to be irrelevant. I merely said, this is what I wish to do, and as the means lay within my power, that was what I decided, end quote.
Wow.
A little bit of trivia. Alfred Hitchcock's unfinished project, Kaleidoscope, was actually inspired by the story of John Haigh.
Really? I did not know that.
Yep.
Wow.
Corpus delicti.
Yeah. Jeez.
But that is the story of the acid killer, John George Haigh, and that's all I have to say about that.
I think the thing that's most amazing to me, and this is a little detail, but the fact that he was so anal about his clothing and everything had to be perfect.
And he had to wear gloves.
Yeah. Side note, when Kris and I first started dating, I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she was here in Lexington. And I remember the first time she came down to visit, you know, of course, I want to make a good impression. So the house is totally clean and everything. And the nightstand in my bedroom.
I can't believe you're going to tell this story.
The nightstand next to my bed. I wasn't in the room at the time, and she opened it up. And, of course, it was sort of like Forgetting Sarah Marshall in the beginning when he's, like, throwing everything in the closet. That drawer just had stuffed in there.
So much junk and change. I'd never seen so many quarters.
Yeah. And she looked at it and went, oh, I know I love him because he's not perfect.
This is how I know I love you.
I always loved that story. Anyway, so yeah, this whole John thing, just being totally Mr. Perfect, but in his private life, he was.
Well, we're both creative people, so we're a little messy, but when it comes to like our spaces where we work, we need it to be right. Yeah. So that's, you know.
Yeah.
But we don't have a messy house. It's not a hoarder. It's not an issue. It's not Jumanji here or anything, or an episode of Hoarders. The house is always clean.
It is.
Let's make sure we tell everybody that.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's move on and do a little Bless Your Heart.
Well, bless your heart.
Number one, I'm calling this one, he didn't see that coming.
I didn't see that one coming.
Now, 2 feisty employees of a San Bernardino sex shop bought,
I like it already.
yeah, fought off an armed robber, yelling at him and throwing sex toys to chase him out.
I was just about to say what they fight with.
Yeah. So he ran out of the store with no money. The attempted robbery caught on surveillance video happened Wednesday around 9:45 p.m., just before closing at Lotions and Lace.
That's too good.
It just keeps
I
getting
love
better.
it.
Yeah, the man walked in with his face covered, pointing what appeared to be a gun. Store employee Amy said she wasn't scared. She was convinced the gun was a fake, and she was having none of it. Quote, with the gun, he walked in, and I just thought he was trying to be funny to scare us, she said. But then I saw the gun, and it was like, really?
Really?
I don't have time for this. She started yelling at him, and at one point, he grabbed her. All right.
Okay.
That's when a coworker at the store started throwing sex toys at him. Eventually, he fled the store empty-handed. Quote, I think he was a coward, said the store's owner.
No.
Yeah, coming in and trying to get over on two females and not realizing that they were pretty feisty.
Yeah.
Police
funny.
released surveillance video of the robbery, including images of the suspect outside of the store with his face uncovered.
Why do I just have like these visions of like a blow up doll going across the room? I don't know.
With that look on her face. Anyway. Okay, number 2. That's not a knife. Police in Oklahoma City are searching for a suspect who is believed to be a juvenile related to an attempted robbery.
Okay.
All right. Authorities were called to an attempted robbery of the I-35 Travel Plaza located in the 1300 block of Southeast 41st Street.
Okay. Where are we?
I don't know. Investigators learned a young man walked into a store and demanded money from the cash register. Although he didn't have a gun, witnesses say he was armed with a miniature bat.
A bat?
Yep.
A live bat?
No, a little baseball bat.
Oh, well.
Yeah, he had a miniature bat. He was going to slap him in the face with it.
So like the little ones that they give it at the Louisville Slugger place. Okay.
According to the police report, the suspect grabbed a drink, an air freshener, and went to the counter to pay for the items. He handed over the money before pulling out a miniature baseball bat and said, "Give me all your money." One of the clerks reportedly said, "You've got to be kidding me."
We've got a theme today.
Yeah. At that point, one of the clerks grabbed a bat, a full-size baseball bat, the real deal, from behind the counter. Authorities say the clerks automatically locked all the doors in the store to try to keep the alleged suspect contained. When he tried to run through the doors and started swinging his bat at the glass, the clerks decided to unlock the doors.
That's not a bat. This is a bat.
This is a bat. Investigators say alleged suspect is 15 to 17 years old and stands about 5 feet tall. Of course, he did not make off with anything from the store.
Oh, that's funny. That's a good one.
All right, number 3, and finally, looking for love in all the wrong places.
Okay.
All right. Wanted man Wayne Parker successfully evaded authorities for nearly a year after committing $1 million in fraud.
Wow.
But then the farmer from Suffolk, England, signed up for a dating app. Cops were shocked to see the convicted criminal crop up after Parker created a profile on Match.com.
That's not too smart.
The 35-year-old scammer was found guilty last October of owing a whopping $970,000 to suppliers.
Wow.
That's a lot of moolah. He had failed to appear in court in February for sentencing and was being hunted by police to no avail until the online lamb Lothario decided to start looking for love.
He got lonely.
Yep, but he also got busted. So there's your stupid criminals. Oh, man.
I don't know. The sex shop one was maybe my all-time favorite.
It was a good one.
All-time favorite.
Yep.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, all you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Please do.
That's my amazing, funny husband out there. I've been crying in here. I was laughing so hard.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.